Hello. Thank you so very much for joining us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. I have a friend who tells a story about when his daughter was 10 years old. She told him that she wanted to play softball. She'd never wanted to play any sport before, so they had to go out and they bought her a glove and they bought her a softball. And he and his little girl went outside every day when he got off work to practice throwing a softball. On Saturdays, they went down to the local park and he taught her how to hit off a tee, and then they graduated to the batting cages. And when it came time for her to try out, my friend was a little concerned because, well, she was 10 and all the other girls had started much younger. He was afraid that his daughter would be a little behind the rest of the girls, even though she'd been working and practicing hard. At the end of the tryouts, the coach announced that unfortunately there were too many players and not everybody was going to make the team this year. And when they read off the list of players, my friend's daughter's name, well, it wasn't on it. He talks about the fact that his heart broke as his little girl cried all the way home. Each and every one of us knows the pain of wanting something, of working for something, only to be disappointed. Maybe you always dreamed of owning your own business and you have this vision, you see the need, and you make the decision that you're going to step out and you're going to try to make that dream a reality. But the bank informs you that you don't qualify for the loan. Or maybe you've always dreamed of going to a certain school. You studied really, really hard. You did really well on the ACT. You got great grades and marks. You did all kinds of service projects, and you still got the rejection letter in the mail. Maybe you thought you'd grow up and you'd have a fairy tale life. You dreamed of falling in love, and you can picture your wedding day, and you picture growing old with somebody that you love. But that's not your reality. You've really just discovered one disastrous relationship after the next. Or maybe you started the business. Maybe you have the perfect marriage. Maybe you got on every team that you tried out for, you got every promotion that you wanted, but you still heard the doctor say that that bump that you found is actually cancer, or your company's being downsized, or your spouse wants a divorce. In that moment, you feel the pain of living in a broken world, and that brokenness oftentimes feels so permanent, certain, final. Last week, we left Joseph in Potiphar's house. We discovered that he was being approached by his master's wife day after day, and Joseph refuses to do this great wickedness, but Potiphar's wife is a stubborn woman, and eventually everything's going to come crashing down. You see, no matter how close we're standing to God, there are times that we get caught in the backwash of the brokenness of this world that we live in. At the end of Genesis 39, we discover that Potiphar's wife sets this trap. Joseph comes into the house to do his job like he does every single day, but today something's a little off. Something's different. You see, today the house is empty. There are no other servants in the house, and it's in that empty house that this woman approaches Joseph with no intention of being refused. Not only does she command Joseph to have sex with her right then and there, she grabs a hold of him so tightly that when he wriggles away free, he leaves his outer robe behind. Potiphar's wife is left standing there, dismissed, rejected, publicly humiliated. And at that very moment, every ounce of her lust turns to wrath. She's no longer lusting after Joseph. Now she despises him. She's not about to let this lowly servant treat her with such contempt. So she immediately calls all of the other servants and she tells this great lie. She says, Joseph, that worthless Hebrew dog, he was offered the opportunity to come and to live among the great Egyptians. He was given the privilege to come and to experience all of the wonders and the beauty of our culture. And how does he show his appreciation? He tries to rape me. He acted shamefully. But I yelled as loud as I could, trying to save my purity. And in all of my yelling and all of my screaming, it scared him off, thankfully. I mean, he even left in such a hurry. Look, he left his coat behind. I'm pretty sure she did scream, but it wasn't the scream of rape. It was a scream of rage. Her screams and her tears are the screams and the tears of a scorned woman who is so enraged that a handsome young Joseph had resisted her advances, that he wanted nothing to do with her. And now she is bent on revenge. She wants Joseph to pay for his humiliation. And so we pick up the story in Genesis 39, verse 6. Potiphar's wife kept Joseph's coat until her husband came home. Then she said, "That Hebrew slave of yours tried to rape me. But when I screamed for help, he left his coat and ran out of the house." Potiphar became very angry and threw Joseph in the same prison where the king's prisoners were kept. Once again, Joseph finds himself in a pit. And there's a part of me that thinks this story is so unfair. I mean, if there's ever anyone in the history of the world that deserves a break, it's Joseph. Where most of us would have at least thought about the temptation, tried to justify our action, Joseph refuses to do this great wickedness against God, and he deserves to be rewarded, not thrown into some prison. But no matter how close Joseph was in his relationship with God, he's discovering the pain of living in a broken world around sinful people. Instead of being rewarded for his faith and obedience, the master that he had served faithfully, the master that was able to prosper because of Joseph, has him taken from this position of power and authority and throws him into the prison where the king's prisoners are kept. That doesn't mean that Joseph is in a minimum security prison or a white collar prison where he's living in a dormitory instead of a prison cell. He's in the prison where the king's prisoners are kept. This is a maximum security prison, the place where hardened criminals are placed. These are the people who Pharaoh believed were the greatest threat to Egypt. This is Alcatraz, this is Leavenworth, this is a supermax prison, and Joseph is in big trouble. I just want to insert a small point here. There are a lot of writings out there that says Potiphar didn't totally believe his wife. I mean, he's the captain of the bodyguard, the chief executioner, a seasoned military killing machine. And the thought is that if he really believed that a slave had attempted to rape his wife, there's no way that he would have let Joseph live or thrown him in prison. The chief executioner would have cut him down on the spot. I mean, after all, Egypt, especially ancient Egypt, is not known for being easy on crime. Potiphar doesn't have Joseph tortured or put to death. Instead, he throws him into this jail. And a lot of really brilliant people believe that Potiphar was not angry at Joseph. He didn't believe his wife. He was angry because he lost his best servant due to a wife that he knew to be unfaithful. And while that may be true, we don't know that for certain. But what I do absolutely know for certain is that God is in complete control of what's happening in Joseph's life. The same God that made his brothers reconsider killing him and instead had him sold off to a bunch of slave traders headed for Egypt, he's still at work behind the scenes. Whatever Potiphar thought about his wife or what he thought about Joseph doesn't really matter because God is the one in control. God is the one writing the story. And it seems that God's not through with Joseph yet. God is patiently and faithfully working in ways that we could never understand. I mean, God has already promised that there's going to be a time when Joseph's brothers and his parents would bow down to him. There's nothing that Potiphar or Potiphar's wife or his brothers or anybody can do to derail the plans of God. So as Joseph sits in his prison cell, he might be wondering, where's God in all of this? I mean, the God who spoke so clearly to him back on his dad's farm now seems eerily silent. I find myself wondering what's going on in Joseph's mind at this point in the story. He knows he hasn't done anything wrong. He's completely sure that he's innocent. He resisted a strong temptation over and over again. He should have been honored for his virtue. And Potiphar's wife is the one that should have been punished. If I was Joseph, I would be thinking, what's the use in being good? What benefit do I get trying to follow God when I keep finding myself in the bottom of a pit? Don't you kind of feel his desperation? I really want to know how Joseph is able to endure the pain and the struggle without losing his faith in God. How does he keep from becoming bitter, vengeful, angry as he faces this prospect of dying in a dungeon in a foreign country? Now, I've already read Genesis 41. I know that Joseph isn't going to be in jail forever, but Joseph doesn't know that. He doesn't know what's going to happen next. All he knew for sure is at this moment, he did what was right and he's suffering for it. And once again, he finds himself in a pit, bound in chains. I mean, think about the injustice of it all. But let's not mistake God's silence for his inactivity. Joseph knew something that we often overlook. He knew that God will not be limited in what he has control over. You see, the story's not over. Let's continue to read. While Joseph was in prison, the Lord helped him and was good to him. He even made the jailer like Joseph so much that he put him in charge of the other prisoners and of everything that was done in the jail. The jailer did not worry about anything because the Lord was with Joseph and made him successful in all that he did. There's that phrase again. The Lord was with him. The Lord's hand was on Joseph, even though Joseph has once again been ripped out of a place of privilege and thrown into a pit. God is with him. I want to be honest here and say that right now it doesn't really look like God is with Joseph. I mean, if your own family members betrayed you, sold you as a slave, would you feel like the Lord was with you? If you were lied about and if your name was slandered, would you feel like the Lord was with you? If you were put in shackles and you were left in a prison cell, would you really believe that the Lord was with you? You see, up to this point in his life, Joseph's story is this really weird series of one step forward, two steps back. He's the favorite son in the house of his father, and then he's betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. He is the favorite slave in the house of Potiphar, giving all kinds of authority and power, and then he's lied about and sent away to prison. One step forward, two steps back. It's likely that Joseph not only felt betrayed, but maybe even cursed by God. I think we understand those feelings. We've probably had those thoughts. We have a tendency to interpret hardships and difficulties as an evidence of God's displeasure with us. Whether we would say that out loud or not, there's this expectation that once we decide to accept God's offer of grace, that we'll live this life of ease. But you're not going to find that teaching in the Bible. Even in the bottom of the prison, God hadn't left Joseph. He was right there doing what he'd always done. God blessed Joseph. He made sure that he found favor in the eyes of others. In the same way that Joseph found favor in the eyes of his dad, Jacob, or in the eyes of his master, Potiphar, we discover that God is working and moving in the story to make sure that once again Joseph finds favor, this time in the eyes of the jailer. But Joseph is learning a very important lesson. The psalmist writes, "Suffering was good for me, because through suffering I learned your laws." While Joseph had a relationship with God back on his parents' farm, it's in the pit that he learns what it is to depend on God. While he knew God when he's living in the house of Potiphar, it's in the prison that he's going to have the space to mature and to deepen his relationship with God. You see, it's in those moments of suffering, those moments when everything is taken from us but God, that we finally realize God is all we ever needed. When we face those pit or dungeon experiences in our life, it's easy to feel like God has forgotten us. Yet it's only in those moments that we discover that God is standing with us. Joseph might not understand everything that's happening right now, but he's learning to trust God. He's learning to recognize what God's doing. Joseph's story is so powerful because it resonates with each and every one of us. We understand what it feels like to be mistreated, disappointed, abandoned. Every one of us have had to navigate through seasons of suffering. And Joseph shows us that in good times, well, those are the times that we can learn to say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And in bad times, we're taught to say, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The book of Genesis is so much more than just a general history of the world and the Israelites. Through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Moses is writing to the people of Israel as they're coming out of Egypt and preparing to re enter the promised land. This isn't the first time that Moses writes about somebody from Joseph's family going into Egypt and experiencing a difficult time. You might remember back in Genesis 12, Joseph's great grandfather, Abraham. Well, during a time of famine, he runs to Egypt. And once he gets to Egypt, he's so afraid that the people would kill him because his wife Sarah is so beautiful, he lies. Instead of trusting that God is able to take care of him in the famine, that God would protect him, Abraham takes matters into his own hands. He moves to Egypt and lies about Sarah being his sister. If you remember that discussion, you'll remember that we talked about how Pharaoh takes Sarah, intending to make her one of his wives. Yet, even in moments of doubt, we discover that the Lord loved Abram and was with him. And so God brings a curse against Pharaoh's house until Sarah is returned to Abram. The Lord was with Abraham, but Abraham doesn't live like he believes the Lord was with him. Now, Moses says, well, let me write about the life of Joseph. And we get a contrast to the story of Abraham. We're shown what it looks like to live your life like you believe the Lord is with you. The people are leaving Egypt and they're about to face their own challenges as they attempt to take possession of the promised land, a land filled with giants. And the Lord is encouraging them to live like they believe He is with them. As we get ready to make our way to the tables today, I want you to take a moment and to think about your life. Think about your giants, your battles, your trials. Maybe you're like Joseph and you feel like a prisoner in your own life. You've been sinned against. You've never dreamed in a million years that your life would turn out the way that it has. You feel this temptation to grow bitter or cynical or weary. You feel the need to take matters into your own hands. You feel the pressure to live like our culture lives. You feel a growing desire to take revenge. God never promised to spare us from suffering, but He does promise that He will not allow the trials of this life to destroy us, that He will protect us by His steadfast love, and He'll use our pain to advance His plan of making us more like Jesus. Some of you are experiencing pain that you never imagined that you would encounter. You're tempted to believe that this is going to destroy you. Your dream is dying. Your hope is almost gone. But if you're trusting in Jesus, you need to know that the Lord is with you. He's not going to let this moment destroy you. Every setback is filtered through the steadfast love of our Heavenly Father, and He is bringing us one step closer to becoming like Christ. The story of Joseph is our story. Every setback, disappointment, struggle, every betrayal, every attack, every pit, every prison, wherever you find yourself today, the Lord is with you. And the table is a reminder as well as an invitation for us to trust Him. Today, God is calling us to live our lives that would tell the entire world that we believe without a doubt the one who offers us His body that we remember through the bread and His blood that we remember through the cup. We are broadcasting to the world that we truly believe that God is with us. And that doesn't mean that life will be perfect here on earth. It means that God is continuing to do the work to transform us so that we will be more like the perfect one, our Savior, Jesus Christ. I hope you have a wonderful time around the table. Never forget how deeply you're loved. And I look forward to seeing you very soon.